This isn't just a story, it's a cry from the soul of nature. She could have chosen the wilderness. The forest was vast, filled with shadows and silence, ancient rocks and hollowed tree trunks, nature's cradle for the wild-born. She could have curled beneath a jagged ledge, hidden beneath snow-dusted pine needles, or disappeared inside a cave carved by time and wind. But she didn't. This wild mother chose something different. Something that defied every primal instinct. Etched into her bones. She chose humans. She chose the scent of wood smoke and old hay, the quiet hum of a forgotten barn at the edge of a sleepy ranch, and two people who had never asked to be chosen. Just after dawn, when the sky was still a pale bruise of lavender and gray, Mary heard it, faint, almost ghost-like, a sound that could have easily been missed, a hush of breathing, a broken, whispered cry behind the barn wall. Her first thought was a bird, maybe a rabbit caught in a coil of wire, but then Tom heard it too. Together they stepped into the barn, the cold clutching their skin, the air still and reverent, as if holding its breath. And under a mound of brittle, time-worn hay, they saw them. 3 newborn bobcat kittens, their eyes sealed shut, fragile bodies pressed together like wilted petals trying to bloom. But even that wasn't the miracle. She was there, the mother, watching, not snarling, not fleeing, just watching. Her amber eyes calm, unreadable, yet brimming with something that felt almost human. Mary didn't move fast. She knelt in slow reverence, her hands resting on her knees, her breath quiet. No reaching, no words, just presence. The bobcat blinked. Once, and stayed. She didn't dart. She didn't bury her young. She stood and waited, as if she had been waiting for them. The wilderness and the human heart are stitched by the same divine thread. When one calls, the other answers. An animal is calling, will you answer? She had been seen before, a shadow at the tree line, a flicker of motion where no creature should be. Neighbors whispered about her like a legend that walked on 4 silent paws. A phantom bobcat who moved like smoke, untouchable, solitary, and unseen. She never dared the open pastures. Never trod too close to fences. She was a story in the periphery, a shape between pine branches. But Mary remembered a day when she wasn't just a shape, late autumn. The earth had turned brittle with frost, and the light moved like glass. Mary had wandered to the edge of the field, checking a fence that leaned too far into the woods. And there, not 20 feet away, stood the bobcat, silent, still. Their eyes met. The cold air hung thick between them, but the silence wasn't hostile. It wasn't wild rage. It was awareness, like one soul staring into another, no growl, no retreat. Just the space between heartbeats. And then she turned and slipped back into the trees like snow melting into the earth. Mary thought of that moment now, with the bobcat watching her from inside the barn, her gaze calm, her decision clear. She had come here for a reason, not out of accident, not out of desperation, but out of some deep, intuitive knowing. Maybe she had grown up nearby, watching from the treetops and ridges. Maybe she had fled from fire or teeth or hunger, but what mattered more than why was what she did. She entrusted the most sacred thing she had, her young, to people, to a place warmed by old hands and patient eyes. And Tom saw it too. She chose us, he said, voice low as prayer. Not stumbled here, not wandered. She chose. Trust is the wild's most fragile offering, and yet, when it's given, it can heal what even time cannot. Prepare yourself for the wild to change your heart. Mary and Tom weren't alone. Their home pulsed with the quiet, rhythmic joy of life, and one of its beating hearts was Maple, their loyal Australian shepherd. She had just given birth weeks earlier to 4 squirming, soft-coated puppies. Little sunbursts of energy, tumbling through the porch snow, squealing, wrestling, yipping like wind chimes. Maple guarded them with a devotion that went beyond instinct. She corrected their clumsy tumbles with a nudge of her nose, curled around them like a living blanket, and let the smallest feed even after the others had dozed off. Her gentleness was a beacon, and perhaps the bobcat saw that too. She would appear at twilight, a silent witness just beyond the fence, watching the pups, watching Maple, watching Mary. Maybe she had seen Mary weeks ago, cradling a wounded raven in trembling arms, whispering to it as she bound its broken wing before sending it soaring into the gray sky. Maybe the bobcat saw something in all of them, a softness, a quiet sanctuary, a language beyond words. Because one night the wild mother returned. As dusk spilled its golden ink across the snow, she watched again, not with fear, but with memory. With a sense of understanding, she knew, somehow she knew. Here, her instincts whispered, they will be safe. Even the untamed carry a longing for shelter, and sometimes the gentlest homes are not built with walls, but with open hearts. This isn't about taming the wild, it's about honoring its trust. The next morning, Mary woke before the sun. Her hands still smelled of broth and cedar as she stepped into the freezing quiet, a small bowl of warm chicken broth cradled in her palms. She moved slowly into the barn, her breath curling in ribbons, placing the bowl gently at the edge of the straw, not close, never close. Respect carved every movement. She didn't call, didn't reach, just left the warmth and stepped away. That night, the bowl was empty. The next night, another bowl. A folded wool blanket, an offering, a gesture, a prayer. They never expected anything in return, but still, she came, always at twilight. The bobcat, cloaked in shadow and silver, light, reappeared, not as a threat, not as a beggar, but as a presence. Sometimes Mary would see her sitting just beyond the barn, her shape sculpted by snowlight, her golden eyes meeting hers. It wasn't fear that stared back. It wasn't wild caution. It was recognition. And Mary understood. She didn't need the bobcat's gratitude, just her trust. And trust in the wild is a sacred thing, a gift rarely given. And as each sunrise bled across the horizon, someone else began to take notice. Maple, when one mother recognizes another, the bond surpasses blood. It becomes an eternal bridge between worlds. Some bonds are written not in words but in the quiet watching between species. Maple had always been curious. Her nose had twitched when the barn door creaked open. Her ears had lifted when the faint cries echoed through the cold. But now, her presence became something more. She started to wait near the barn, not anxious, not intrusive, just present. As the kittens began to wriggle and explore, tiny legs trembling under their own weight, it was Maple who stood nearby. Just a few feet away, her tail still, her eyes soft. She didn't bark, didn't chase, just watched, and the kittens watched her back. Each day she crept closer, until one morning their paws brushed the light just outside the barn, and Maple stood there like a silent guardian. At the same time, the puppies on the porch were growing into clumsy, bouncing joy machines. But now and then, when the air was still and the sun poured just right, Mary would catch it. One of the wild kittens, peeking from the shadows, watching, once the smallest pup wandered too close. The bobcat kitten stepped forward, nose to nose, one heartbeat, one breath. And then stillness, no growl, no fear, just a moment. A bridge. A miracle. The wild doesn't always speak in roars or howls. Sometimes it whispers through a puppy's stillness or a kitten's gaze, and in that silence the world is remade. Even the fiercest hearts sometimes surrender to grace. And in that surrender, a new kind of miracle is born. She kept her distance like a wisp of smoke trailing behind twilight, never close, never loud. Always arriving in the blue hush of the late hours, slipping across the snow-draped earth, like a whisper. And always gone before the sun dared peek over the pine-crowned horizon. The wild mother didn't hiss. She didn't snarl or bare her teeth when Maple approached the barn, didn't lift a paw when the pups tumbled near the open door. She didn't guard with growls or defend with lunges. Instead, she watched, not cold, not warm, but something eerily in between, like the hush before a snowfall. Her eyes never blinked when the smallest puppy yelped after tripping over a root. Her ears merely twitched when tiny paws skidded close to her den. She didn't leap. She didn't correct. She simply observed, measured like a soul weighing the unknown. not evaluating the humans, not even the land. But Maple, as if deep in her wild blood, something ancient and maternal, recognized the shepherd not as an intruder, but as an equal, a guardian. And it was Mary who noticed it first, who saw the slight change in the bobcat's stillness. The way her muscles softened just slightly when Maple laid down nearby. The bobcat wasn't just tolerating her. She was allowing her, accepting her presence like a prayer answered in silence. The days passed like petals falling, quiet and slow. The kittens found their legs, clumsy but determined, their eyes wide and shimmering. The bobcat slowly began to vanish for longer stretches, into the woods before dusk, returning long after nightfall. She was hunting again, she was trusting. Then, one afternoon, everything changed. There are moments when the divide between the wild and the human dissolves, and we stand together, not as enemies, but as protectors of the innocent. The wild doesn't always knock. Sometimes it just walks through the door, and everything you believe about nature begins to change. Mary was pouring coffee when it happened. A slow morning, soft sun, steam rising in spirals from her cup. Her gaze wandered through the kitchen window and froze. Her breath caught mid-chest. There in the yard, tangled in the chaos of tumbling fur and wagging tails, was something different. A fourth figure, smaller, spotted, a bobcat kitten, not hiding, not watching from the shadows, but among them, in the middle of Maple's pups. He didn't play yet, just stood, head tilted, watching, curiosity dancing behind his amber gaze. And Maple was rigid at first, her stance alert, her tail high, body reading every movement, like music. But then she exhaled. A deep, slow breath like an unspoken blessing. No bark, no warning, just a soft surrender. She allowed him, and then came another kitten. And another. Like autumn leaves drifting into a river, they stepped forward from the barn's shadow. One by one, following the scent trails of the puppies, following something deeper, a feeling, perhaps. Safety. The line between wild and domestic didn't blur that day. It vanished. Erased not by force, but by choice. Mary and Tom said nothing. Did nothing? Because what was unfolding was not theirs to control. It was sacred, unwritten, a silent miracle of fur and breath. By the week's end, the unthinkable had become normal. Morning coffee now meant watching 7 creatures, 4 puppies, 3 bobcat kittens, tangled in the same golden patch of sun. Napping, nuzzling, a living knot of warmth and wildness, their sounds indistinguishable, squeaks, chirps, growls, purrs. A shared song of innocence. Love doesn't ask about bloodlines, it sees play, softness, and shared sleep as the only language that matters. Where the world sees difference, the heart sees home. No one had taught them this. Not Mary. Not Tom. Not even Maple. There were no rules, no schedules. Only instinct and intention. Only hearts choosing one another in the purest language nature ever wrote. The puppies and kittens moved as one. They waited for each other. They found each other in sleep, in play, in the quiet rhythm of sunrise and snowfall. Maple stayed close, always nearby, not overbearing, not distant, just present, the gentle mother, correcting softly when the rough got too wild or a tired body needed nudging back to rest. But she never divided them. She let them be together. Until one day she had to intervene. It was Scout, the boldest of the bobcat kittens, named by Tom for his sharp gaze and fearless stride, who started it. The puppies were tumbling in the tall grass, sunlight scattered through their fur, laughter in their breath. Scout pounced, a bit too hard, his wildness surging. His emotions big, a joyful attack, not meant to hurt, but it did. The smallest pup yelped, rolled, went still, a hush fell, no one moved. Then Maple did, not barking, not snarling, just rising with the force of something ancient and righteous. She stepped between them, tail low, gaze firm. Scout hesitated, eyes wide, ears flicking back. He waited for punishment, for rejection, but it never came. Maple turned, trotted back to the porch, and returned with something, a fraying Knotted rope toy, old, chewed, loved. She dropped it gently in front of Scout, not as a threat, but as an offering, an invitation. His ears perked. He pawed it, chewed gently, and the puppy, recovered, crawled beside him. Just like that, the thread was mended. Correction in love isn't about exclusion, it's an invitation to stay, to grow, to belong. Sometimes the greatest rescues are not what we do for the animals, but what they awaken in us. The days grew longer, softer. The snow began to melt in uneven patches, revealing earth that smelled of spring and promise. Mud clung to paws. Tails wagged faster. The puppies and bobcat kittens began to wander, not far, just far enough to feel the world open beneath their paws. A bigger playground, a wider home, but then something shifted. It was subtle at first. Maple pacing near the barn's edge, her ears twitching, her breath shallow. Something wasn't right. Her paws wore the grass into trembling paths. Her nose swept the wind like a prayer. Mary felt it in her chest before she knew why. Tom called, searched, the barn, the porch, the fence line, and then they knew. One of the puppies, the smallest one, was missing. Panic cracked through the air like thunder. Maple's whines grew sharper. Her body shivered as she circled again and again, desperate. And then silence, thick, heavy, until movement. A shadow at the edge of the forest, silent, certain. The bobcat stepped from the trees, a shape dangling gently from her mouth. Mary froze, her coffee cup slipping from her fingers. Tom stopped breathing. Maple stood still. The bobcat moved slowly, delicately, into the clearing, into their world. And in her jaws, the puppy, alive, still, safe, she walked forward with. Regal calm, each step a poem written in gratitude and grace. And at the edge of the barn, she set the puppy down in the grass, as gently as if he were her own. In that moment, the wild and the domestic were no longer opposites, they were family. When the wild protects what is not its own, that is no longer just instinct, that is love. He was shaking, soaked in mud, a trembling scrap of fur cradled in the fragile light of dawn. But he was alive, the missing puppy, the quiet one. Somehow, he had crawled under the old fence, slipped into a thicket so tangled and deep that not even Maple's sharp nose could trace it. He was hidden too well, lost too far. But someone had found him. Not Tom, not Mary, not Maple, the bobcat. The wild mother. The one with no collar, no tag, no obligation, the one who owed this world nothing, and yet gave everything. She had carried him back in her mouth like he was her own, her steps slow and sure, her eyes fierce and steady. When she laid him gently onto the grass, she didn't look to the humans for praise, not for approval, not even for comfort. She looked at Maple, their eyes met, mother to mother, not rivals. Not strangers equals guardians, and then without a sound, she turned and vanished into the trees, her presence retreating like a memory made of wind. Mary dropped to her knees, tears catching in her throat, as she wrapped the puppy into her arms and whispered, "The wild mother saved someone else's child." The sentence hung in the air like scripture, not just a fact, but a revelation. Because what she did wasn't survival, it was sacrifice. It was grace. It was the raw, wordless miracle of animal rescue, the kind only nature and love can script. Sometimes, family isn't who you birth, it's who you're willing to carry through the storm. In the wild, danger doesn't knock. It watches, it waits, and then it walks right into your peace. It was a morning thick with fog when Tom first sensed the shift, a tension in the trees, a silence beneath the birdsong. He was checking the far fence line, deep into the woods, when he heard them, voices, low, clipped, unfamiliar. He slowed, his boots careful on the frosted leaves. And then he saw them, two men in orange vests, rifles slung casually over their shoulders, stepping like they owned the forest, hunters, not locals. Tom would have remembered their faces. One of them knelt near a muddy patch of ground, pointing to a distinct rounded track in the earth. Paw pads, claws, bobcat. Tom's breath caught. His chest tightened. He stayed hidden behind a tree, the bark biting into his palms. "They're fresh," one man muttered. She's got a den nearby. Might be raising kits. The other nodded, eyes hard. Wouldn't be bad to report it. It's too close to the pastures. Tom didn't wait to hear more. He turned, heart pounding, and walked home slow, the trees suddenly colder. Every shadow felt like it was watching. He didn't tell Mary right away, but the moment he stepped through the door, she saw it, the fear tucked behind his silence. And when he finally spoke, her world went still. "If they find her," she whispered, her voice hollow, "they'll take her," Tom said, "or worse." That night, they didn't sleep. They sat on the porch in silence, mugs in hand, watching the barn. The bobcat came as she always did, silent, graceful, unseen by the rest of the world, but no longer unseen by them. Mary's fingers clenched around her cup. "If they try to take her," she said, voice like steel wrapped in sorrow, "they'll have to come through me first." Tom looked over, eyes glistening. Mary didn't flinch. "She trusted us. She brought her children here. We don't get to forget that just because it's inconvenient." They stared into the night toward the dark silhouette of the barn where 7 little lives slept tangled together. "She's part of this family now," Mary said, "and I won't let anyone take family away. To protect the wild is not to tame it, it is to love without ownership and to fight without condition. Storms don't always arrive with warning. Sometimes they come to test who we really are." The wind came sudden, slicing through the valley with icy precision. By nightfall, the storm had swallowed the land. Snow blew sideways, stinging, furious, smothering the world in white. It piled against the barn doors, swallowed the fences, bent the trees until they groaned under its weight. Mary sat by the window all night, watching, waiting, but the bobcat never came. Morning brought a silence so thick it felt like grief. Tom trudged into the woods, snow clinging to his boots, his voice raw from calling. Mary whispered into the barn's dimness, hoping for a flicker of gold in the straw shadows. Nothing. Day turned into another. And another she had left before, yes, but never like this. Never without checking on her young. The kittens didn't cry. They didn't play. They barely moved. They just waited, silent, still. The puppies, usually a storm of wagging tails, now whimpered softly by the hay pile. One of them nudged a bobcat kitten gently, then curled beside it as if to lend it heat. And Maple, faithful Maple, who had long made the barn part of her rounds, walked in with purpose, slow, steady. She stepped into the nest without hesitation. No hesitation, no confusion. She curled around them all, her pups and the wild ones too, and laid her chin upon the smallest bobcat kitten's back, and stayed, a still sentinel against the cold. That night Tom stood in the barn doorway, eyes hard against the wind. "If she doesn't come back?" he began but couldn't finish. Mary didn't respond. She had no answer. Only hope. Hope that somewhere in the wilderness a mother was still fighting her way home. Sometimes the bravest thing a mother can do is keep another's children warm. In the darkest storms, the wild will either vanish or return as something holy. On the 5th day, just before dawn, the rain came. Cold, heavy, relentless. It drummed against the roof like a heartbeat of the earth. The fields became rivers. The hills moaned beneath the weight of thunder. Mary opened the barn doors, heart sinking, her coat already drenched. And there, at the edge of the gate, stood a shadow soaked to the bone, the bobcat. Her fur matted, ribs sharp beneath her skin, eyes sunken but alive. She didn't make a sound. She didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, through the mud and mist, through the storm and sorrow, slow but sure. Her head low, her shoulders tense, her spirit unbroken. She crossed the threshold, no longer an outsider. Not here, not now. She didn't look at the humans. She walked straight to the straw nest, to the pile of bodies curled in sleep. The kittens, the puppies, Maple, the dog lifted her head, eyes alert but calm. She didn't move. And the bobcat leaned forward. Her nose touched Maple's muzzle, softly, silently, a gesture that cracked something open in the universe. It was not a warning, not a surrender, it was recognition. Trust, thanks. a bond sealed not by blood but by love. She looked at her kittens, at the puppies, then turned once slowly and curled up beside them, not to reclaim them. She had never lost them. They had always been hers. And now they were all safe. When the wild lays down beside the tame, we are no longer just witnesses, we are family. The wild may leave footprints in the snow, but the ones it leaves in your heart never melt. Half a year passed like the turning of a sacred page. The yard, once echoing with squeals and paw steps, was quieter now. The puppies had grown. Strong, lean, wise. All but one had found new homes, soft hands, open porches, new beginnings, but one stayed. His name was Finn, loyal, steady, with eyes that still searched the tree line like they remembered every miracle. And he wasn't alone. One bobcat kitten, the quietest, the watcher, never fully left. His name was Ash. He came every evening, slept curled on the porch beside Maple, ran through the fields with Finn, their bodies moving like verses in the same poem, wild and domestic, yet inseparable. Different in every way except the ones that mattered. And the bobcat, the mother, still came too, quiet, unseen, watching, not checking on her kittens, not anymore. She came to watch the yard, the porch, the life she helped protect. Sometimes she stayed longer than she should have. Sometimes her eyes lingered not on what she had lost, but on what she had helped create. A family, unwritten, unspoken, unbreakable. Sometimes nature chooses a path we'll never understand. And, in that mystery, we find the meaning of love.